All right. So, to kickstart the event, our first speaker, Dr. Yisrael Irving Ziderman, has been involved with Tekhelet research for over 5 decades. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in Animal
I can see you
Physiology
in the background. You're there.
from
These rooms over here.
London University, as well as a Master of Science and PhD degrees in Biochemistry from the Hebrew University, Jerusalem. When the editors of the Talmudic Encyclopedia approached Dr. Ziderman in 1969 to summarize the doctoral thesis on Tekhelet written in 1913 by Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi Herzog, the former chief rabbi of Israel, it was his first exposure to the topic. Over the years since then, he has become a worldwide authority on Tekhelet. He authored the scientific proof for the identification of the banded dye murex as the snail used to produce the ancient Tekhelet, and also studied Talmudic sources on the Tekhelet in order to substantiate his scientific results.
See you in the picture.
Again, please ask questions so that they can be addressed to the event by typing it into the comments section under the different channels. If you're watching it through, let's say, TorahAnytime.com, there's a link, tekhelet.org/QA. You can type in the questions in the contact form over there, and they will be addressed as well after each speaker. Okay, so I'm just gonna mute myself.
Shalom from Shoresh, Israel. Welcome to this wonderful event. I'd like to open my remarks with a quotation from Maimonides. The Rambam deals with the question, what is the relationship between scientific discovery and halakha? And this he writes about at the end of the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctification of the new moon. And these are his words in translation into English. The rationale for all these calculations, which the Rambam has gone through and explained in 16 chapters of this section, the rationale for all these calculations and the reasons why this number is added and why that subtraction is made, and how all these concepts are known, and the proofs for each of these principles are the subject of the sciences of astronomy and geometry, concerning which the Greeks wrote many books. These texts are presently in the hands of the sages, but the texts that means the sages in his time, but the texts written by the sages of Israel in the age of the prophets from the tribe of Yisachar have not been transmitted to us. So all we had, the Maimonides had in his time, and so today, all we have are the scientific works of the Greeks. Nevertheless, since these concepts can be proven in an unshakable manner, leaving no room for question, the identity of the author, be he a prophet or a Gentile, is of no concern. For a matter whose rationale has been revealed and has proven truthful in an unshakable manner, we do not rely on the personal authority of the individual who made these statements or taught these concepts, but solely on the proofs he presented and the reasons he made known. This shows us how important a scientific discovery is when we're discussing this matter. Another idea I'd like to present to you before I start talking specifically about the Tekhelet is a critical reading of the sources we have. Those sources which were written down and composed before the time when Tekhelet disappeared in the 7th century of the Common Era, and those, of course, written afterwards right until our day. What I would like to say is that those written before Tekhelet disappeared, we expect the author to have seen himself Tekhelet and seen the Chilazon, and he could have a first-hand knowledge of the subject. But those written since then, since the 7th century, there are only really descriptions of how the author learned and studied the subject, written by others before his time. And this is really a question of aid and aid, and therefore we must be critical about anything written at the time when the author would himself not have seen the Chilazon and not have seen the Tekhelet. I'd like to divide my talk into three parts. The first one is on the identification of the Chilazon. Second of all, the color of the Tekhelet. And thirdly, what is the current research, scientific research that's being carried out today. First of all, the identification of the Chilazon. It's important for us to distinguish Tekhelet from the other dyed wools that are mentioned in the Bible, Argaman and Tolat Shani. First of all, let me show you the creature called Kermes, which is a scale insect that lives on oak trees. And if you look carefully, I'll try and focus here. Yes, you can see in the glass there are little balls, small red-black balls which are rolling around, and that is the Kermes from which the Tolat Shani color was made. You can see them very clearly now. They live and grow on oak trees in Israel and other countries, and from them the Tolat Shani was made, and the color of that dye is a shade of red called crimson. The second one is the Argaman in English Tyrian purple, and that is purely one chemical called dibromo indigo, which you saw in the video. And this is made from many species of marine mollusks, shellfish, in many parts of the world, in different seas around the world. Let me just show you what the chilazon of the Argaman looks like. I think you can see that. Yes, there. Let me rotate it a bit so you can see the other side. This is the shellfish from which Argaman is made, Tyrian purple. And finally, we come to the chilazon from which Tekhelet is made. This is the banded dimurex, or Murex trunculus. Here she is. And you can see one side is the other side. This is called in English a banded dimurex. This shellfish lives purely in the Mediterranean Sea and the adjacent Atlantic coasts. Now, how do we understand the words of Maimonides, of Rambam, when he writes regarding the chilazon of Tekhelet, B'yam hamelach hu matzui. The chilazon is found in the Salt Sea. He is not talking about the Dead Sea, which we are familiar with today, which we call Yam HaMelech in modern Hebrew, but he's talking about the Mediterranean. And he is saying that only in the Mediterranean in the salt water, can this chilazon live and be caught. The interesting thing is that the words B'yam HaMelech hu matzui, he is found in the Salt Sea, is actually the way the Rambam understood the words of the Gemara on the same issue, but there it says, Oleh achat l'shivim shana. The chilazon comes up once in 70 years. And this has been regarded just as an exaggeration, but really the Maimonides solves the problem of coming up once in 70 years, which can't be describing some real creature. What he's saying is the chilazon comes up once in 70 years. In other words, it never comes up. If you wait 70 years, you may see it. What he's saying is that it's all the time, it's in the sea, it never comes up. And therefore, this chilazon which we have, which I just showed you, is in the video. This chilazon is only found in the Mediterranean Sea. The second problem with the words of our sources is the words of the Gemara regarding the chilazon, but gufo dome layam. Its body is similar to the sea. This is usually given to understand the color of its body, and the color of the shell is similar to that of the sea. But I've just showed you, and you saw before in the video, that this shellfish is its shell the color of the sea. To me, it looks just off-white. cream color, and that's it. So how could this ever be called having a body color similar to that of the sea? The fact of the matter is that this shellfish and the ones we saw before have been cleaned from biological fouling, all kinds of creatures which in their natural state live and multiply on the shell. And I have here an example of this. You can see in this shell fish, which actually is one of those from which we make argaman, you can see that the shellfish on the shell on the outside is covered with beautiful colors, which are similar to the biological fouling which you find on the stones and on the rocks on the seabed all around Israel. And therefore, it's difficult for the divers who are collecting the chilazonot to distinguish between the actual shellfish and the stones and rocks around it. And that is the meaning of gufot domeh layam. It is similar to the sea. And you may say to me, just a minute, the sea is water. What color is water? Haha, that is not the meaning of sea in this case, because we have in the temple we had a structure called Yam Shel Shlomo, the basin of Shlomo, which was used for washing. That Yam means a basin of Solomon, and therefore Gufot Domeh Layam, its body, its shell, is similar in color to the sea bed. So we have now described something about the identification of the chilazon, and the word for this color we call purple. The color of the argaman is actually taken from the Greek word porphyra, and porphyra refers in Greek to mollusks that yield the dyes. And from those that yield dyes, the ancients divided into two separate categories. One of Tekhelet and another one was argaman. And in English, that is hyacinth purple, that's Tekhelet, and Tyrian purple, which is the color of the argaman. Hyacinth purple is the Tekhelet, and Tyrian purple is the argaman. The interesting thing about the Tekhelet is this was one of the most important industries and most lucrative industries in antiquity, and it had no unique connection with Jewish tradition or biblical requirements at all. And this we know from all the ancient literature, the archaeological finds, and comparing languages. But even in our own book of Yechezkel, the prophet Yechezkel, in chapter 27, he describes how Tekhelet and argaman were part of international traveling and wasn't something specifically Jewish. And there it says, I'll say it in English, Haran and Caneh and Eden, the traffickers of Sheba, Assyria, and Media were your traffickers. They were your traffickers with adornments, with wraps of Tekhelet, international trade. And the previous verse says there, linen with embroidery from Egypt was your sail, the sail of your Israeli boats, to be to you for a staff. Tekhelet and argaman from the Isles of Elisha was your covering. And so we see that all the information from the ancient world regarding this industry of Tekhelet was common to them, to the world, and to Israel. And therefore, from that, we can learn all these details, specific details about our Tekhelet, which we're interested in. Let me now go to the second question, the color of Tekhelet. This has always been a big issue and a thing of great interest. In order to understand this subject, it's important to understand, in order to know that in the ancient world, there was no abstract concept of color. In our case, Tekhelet and argaman were not colors at all, but they are commodities dyed with wool. Wool dyed to certain colors, in this case with chilazonot, with shellfish, and in the case of Tolat Shani, with the Kermes insect. So you may say to me, how do I know that these are not the names for colors? Well, that's simple. We know that these materials are mentioned in the Bible. in the book of Shemot, and there it's part of a verse which lists those materials which were used in building the Mishkan. And there it says, Zahav, v'chesef, u'nechoshet, Tekhelet, argaman, v'tolat shani, v'shesh. Now here the verse starts off with the gold, the zahav, and then the silver, and then the copper, the nechoshet. Are these referring just to the color of gold, the color of silver? Of course not. Everyone knows and realizes also from the continued use of the word that gold is referring to the metal gold. Similarly, silver metal, and similarly to the copper, the nechoshet, and similarly the rest of the verse continues. Tekhelet, argaman, tolat shani. They are dyed wools. They are commodities and not just abstract colors. So we've reached a point where we see that in antiquity, but what is called in our Bible Tekhelet was understood in the language of the time mainly as hyacinth purple, and this gives us, I think, the most important pointer to what color we are talking about, because the hyacinth purple and the wild hyacinth. The wild hyacinth is a flower which everyone should be able to see, and if you don't have one where you live, you can find it in the internet, and you can see what a beautiful radiant blue this flower has. But however, in the shellfish which we're talking about, with the chilazon of the Tekhelet, there is no color at all. Only in a certain gland of the chilazon there is a colorless precursor, which is removed, as we saw in the video, and taken through two stages. The first one is formation of the dye stuff, which you didn't see so clearly in the video, followed by the second stage of dyeing. Now, what about the formation of a dye from the colorless precursors, which are actually extracted into hot water from the body of the snails? First of all, no illumination, no sunlight is required for this first stage to form the Tekhelet dye stuff. But if you, instead of taking many dye fish, as you saw in the video, many chelazonot, not if you take many of them and you gather them together, as you saw in the video, you'll notice that the color that you get is the color of violet, as you saw in the video. But if you take individual shellfish one at a time and take the color, the small amount of color from each one, then the color varies. Some of them give blue, and some of them give shades of purple. And this is a subject which is not still understood and has not been researched. Finally, attempts have been made to understand what's different between one chilazon and the other. Some of them give blue and some of them give purple. Of course, this is due to different proportions of between the amounts of the three constituents of the violet monobromo indigo, which you saw in the video, the purple dibromo indigo, and the blue indigotine. But why there should be difference between one snail and another is still not known, and this is a real challenge for us. So what we receive from the shellfish, as you saw in the video, is a color which is violet, and violet appears to be inappropriate because we expect, as the video showed, we expect to have a blue color. So we went. The process was use of a photochemical breakdown, which was applied during stage 2 of the dyeing, and that decomposes, as you saw in the video, the two bromo indigos, converting all the color stuff to blue indigo itself, as you saw in the video. But this process, which you saw quite clearly demonstrated in the video, raises certain issues. The first one is in antiquity there was no illumination during the dyeing process. They didn't conduct the dyeing in glass vessels, as you saw in the video, but in clay or rock vessels, and these vessels were covered during the time that the dye was developed. So the debromination, which you saw in the video, couldn't have been carried out in antiquity. Second of all, as you saw, and the essential part of the process of debromination, which you saw, is the use of a very strong chemical, dithionite. But this is a modern artificial chemical reagent that did not exist in antiquity. A third issue is that if you would apply this debromination reaction to argaman, to pure bromo indigo, you get all of it converted to indigo. Because of this, all of the shellfish, those of Tekhelet and those of argaman, would all give the same blue color, and therefore you would have no chilazon, which was specific for Tekhelet, and this obviously is not what we understand from the way it's described in the Talmud in particular, and in the Maimonides, that there was a specific chilazon, hachilazon, which was used only for making Tekhelet. And not only that, but there was also in the Talmud, copied by the Rambam in this halakha, that there was an analytical test performed in antiquity by our ancestors, which could distinguish between Tekhelet on the one hand and a forged blue dye called kala ilan, which is considered to be indigo itself. Now, these two materials are the same. The blue formed, the indigo formed from the chilazon that we saw as we saw in the video, and the blue indigo which you received from kala ilan. They're the same chemical material, and therefore, in an analytical test as described in the Talmud and in Maimonides, they would be distinguished. But if we have all of the bromo indigo converted into indigo, there would be no difference, and therefore it wouldn't stand up to the analytical test written in the Bible. And finally, I'd like to mention, why bother to go through such an arduous process of fishing and changing all the chemistry in order to produce this indigo when it's readily available as kala ilan. And so if there are so many doubts, there's a fake and there's another safek, and therefore there's a real problem here of how we can really believe that this product, this debromination product, was used in antiquity. So now that's the bad news that I'm bringing to you. But of course, there is good news going with it, and that's why I'm here, in order to tell you that if we take the violet color, the dye or the dyed wool, as produced directly from the chilazon on mild heating to 60 or 80 degrees, the violet color changes spontaneously to blue in a thermochromic transition, it's called by chemists, and there's no change in molecular structure or molecular composition that you saw demonstrated to you by the formulae in the video. This process of just heating is non-destructive, as I said. No chemical change, is irreversible. And so why does it happen? Well, how can the color change without any chemical change? This has been researched by leading chemists in recent year or two, and it's been proved that the change in color is only due to a decrease in the particle size of the dye stuff dyed in the wool or in the pure dye itself. So conversion of initial violet Tekhelet to indigo is unnecessary, and it would be good if we could utilize this new knowledge of replacing the debromination process with a thermochromic transition without any change in the material which we're using. I would like now to add one personal note. When I pioneered the renewal of Tekhelet and the discovery of the chilazon of the Tekhelet, my idea was to produce some new kiyum of a mitzvah that will be able to unite the people of Israel of all walks of life and in all places in one Patil Tekhelet in their tzitzit. But unfortunately, over the soon after this was done, and in particular in the years, the few decades which have followed since then, and we found there are over 30 different ways of tying the tzitzit with Tekhelet, based on all kinds of sources, ancient sources, which were, as I mentioned before, should be not be taken too seriously, because they were all written after there was no Tekhelet available anyway, after the 7th century of the Common Era. We have a prohibition of lo titkodedu, not to make all separate ways of fulfilling our mitzvot. But nevertheless, I see that public there are sites on the internet which publish and give you even directions how to tie over 30 different ways. And this is changing our mitzvot into some kind of supermarket where you wander around and choose what color, what design, and what arrangement takes your fancy, and use that. I think this is something detrimental, and I must really tell you that sometimes I even regret that I started this whole bandwagon of Tekhelet, because it's led to this division and argumentation over what is the correct way to tie the tzitzit with Tekhelet. Ongoing research. The very last remark I would like to make. Professor Muki Spiegel of Haifa University, my colleague, last year received a special grant from the Ministry of Agriculture in Israel in order to research Tekhelet. What is he researching? What is left now to be researched? It is because until today, and it will continue, the chilazon of the Tekhelet is a protected species in Israel, and we are not allowed to collect or gather or fish the chilazonot of Tekhelet from the Israeli seaboard. We have to import them from other countries in the northern part of the Mediterranean. And of course, this means we're depending on the chasadim of the goyim to be able to carry out this import, and we can't be sure that it will carry on forever. And therefore, Professor Muki Spiegel is going to try to find a method of growing and breeding the chilazon of Tekhelet in captivity, in glass containers, so that we can produce, first of all, the chilazon grown from native chilazonot Tekhelet which live on the Israeli shore and not in Bulgaria or in some other country. Second of all, it will mean we'll be able, in a captivity, to preserve this chilazon for posterity, because there have been periods in the last couple of years in which, in certain places, it was extremely difficult to find the chilazonot Tekhelet in the sea, and they seem to have disappeared, seem to have been destroyed. Why? Because of pollution, which is a well-known scientific discovery, ecological discovery, that the poisons due to pollution of the Mediterranean can and have at certain stages reduce the populations to below anything that we can use, and therefore we have them in captivity. We'll be able to multiply them whenever we need to. So, and this system, which Professor Spiegel is working on, is called mariculture. That means agriculture in the sea. And by breeding the chilazonot in aquaria, we'll be able to have the amounts to provide chilazon without any limits in the amounts and a price that we can choose. That is all that I wanted to say. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you found my explanations of interest. And of course, question time. And if there's not enough time for all the questions, I'm sure I'll be very pleased if you all would contact me by email, and I would be pleased to share any further knowledge with you. Can't hear him. No, still got. No good. So I finish. I can't hear anything. Your throat is dry. I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Thank you, Dr. Ziderman. So, in the interest of time, I see that there have been a few questions asked. So I'll select a handful from various forums, and we'll go on to the next speaker. So the first question I see here is from Micha Berger. He asks, if having multiple multiple different ways of tying is los escodedu, then wouldn't the same apply for two different orders of parshios and tefillin? And yet, that machlokas existed for centuries until the Rambam, Rashi, and Rabbeinu Tam felt a need to take sides. Is there a problem of los escodedu if people aren't arguing about it and each letting others do their own thing?
Yeah. Well, in English you say comparisons are odious. You can't learn from one question of tefillin to some other issue in general or in particular in halakha. We're all aware of the difference of opinion regarding tefillin, but you've got two choices, and there are many people who quite happily use both types of tefillin every day, every morning, and so there's no problem of how to conduct oneself. But here we're talking of an amazing number of over 30 different ways of tying, and in any shul where many people are wearing a patil Tekhelet, you see that every corner there's something different, and I think that is what upsets me.
Okay. Next question is from Ed Malkiel. He asks, "We understand from your work that the purple color may change to blue long after the dyeing process when exposed to heat or sunlight. How then can we be sure that the original color of archaeological textile artifacts was blue?"
Was what?
Sorry.
Local?
"We understand from your work that the purple color may change to blue long after the dyeing process when exposed to heat or sunlight. How then can we be sure that the original color of the archaeological textile artifacts was blue? It may have turned to blue now, right? But how do we know that originally it was blue and not purple?"
Well, that's a very good question, and I didn't want to go into that aspect. Of course, according to our sources, Talmudic and Midrashic and all the ancient literature that we have, we don't know. Nowhere does it say what color it's supposed to be. In fact, even as mentioned by all writers on this subject, in particular in the video, there it says they quote the saying in the Talmud and in the Midrash that Tekhelet domeh layam. The Tekhelet is similar color to the sea and similar to the sky. But this is just one version. As the Rabbi Herzog brought in his doctorate, there are 8 different versions of this Agadah. And in the Yalkut Shimoni, it says, for instance, I'm quoting, Tekhelet domeh la'asabim. That's the first thing it's similar to. Tekhelet is similar to plants. Asabim, and it continues, Asabim domim la'ilanot. The Asabim themselves, they're similar in color to trees. And then and after that only ilanot larakia, trees are similar to the color of the sky, and it even goes on rakia lanoga. The sky is similar to one of the planets, Noga, which is white, and Nogala Keshet, which is all the others. And also in Midrash Rabbah, you find the same. You say the same Tekhelet domeh la'asabim. So you don't really know what color it was. My guiding principle has been that what the halakha lays down in the Talmud is that haba min hachilazon, Tekhelet haba min hachilazon, made from the chilazon, is kshera. But that saying continues, and it says sheba lo min hachilazon pesula. There's a double law here. It tells you the positive law, and also it tells you the opposite is not kasher. And this means that the color which you obtain from the chilazon itself is the color that you're supposed to get. And as the questioner asked, of course you instantly don't get a purple, you get a violet color, which is bluer than purple. And let me just show you what I'm talking about. Here I've got a picture. I hope. Let me just get it focused here. Yes, you can see here the on the right you can see purple, which is dibromo indigo. That's argaman, and then the next one in the middle is the monobromo indigo, which you can see is a beautiful violet color, and that when you heat it, it goes blue. That's MBI heated. And finally, on the left, you have regular plant indigo color Ilan, and you should be able to see that the indigo and the indigo here on the side, and the that's here, and the heated monobromo indigo next to it are the same blue color. And therefore, those who would like to use a violet tint in their Tekhelet, that's certainly very kosher. And those who prefer a blue can do so just by heating it, without any change in the material, the actual material that the dye stuff consists of.
Okay. Dr. Ziderman, you are now on. Are you still on? I think you may have muted yourself.
Pardon?
No, never mind. I thought you accidentally muted yourself. Okay, very good. I think it's a bit over, but there is actually one more question, which Josh Fogel asked based on the previous questions. That's why I'm bringing it up, and then we'll move to the next speaker. Can heating other species besides the murex, so the Hexaplex trunculus more particularly, can any other species be heated up to turn violet to indigo, quote unquote, blue? If yes, how can we say that only the murex trunculus or the Hexaplex trunculus is the true color source of Tekhelet?
Oh, good. That's a very important question, and there's no problem in this case. This specific thermochromic transition is a very, very rare chemical event. It only occurs in very, very few types of dye molecules, and in fact, I don't even know any other ones personally. The reaction which I'm talking about only occurs with one chemical dye, monobromo indigo. Monobromo indigo. That is the one that changes from violet to blue, as the questioner asked. And this material, monobromo indigo, is only found in the chilazon Tekhelet. And so far, there's no problem that the questioner refers to. This change of color is specific to our chilazon. There is another reaction which is similar in this connection, in which if you heat, a scientist has found, although there hasn't been research in Israel at all, another scientist found that if you heat dibromo indigo, it can become redder. Instead of going towards blue, it goes red, but that's a separate reaction, and that's nothing to do with a Tekhelet. It only would apply to a discussion on Argaman, but that will probably be the subject of our next Yom Iyun.
Bezras Hashem. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ziderman, for giving your time and insight. I'm seeing from the comments that everybody has really appreciated not only the 50 plus years of research that you've done, but also the few minutes that you've been able to present your latest findings and also answer a few very important questions. So I'm going to move on to the next speaker now. Okay.